Indeed, earlier I said to Reverend White that I would not be speaking about biology because it was my science courses in college that actually made me realize that I should become a rabbi. Last Sunday, Unitarian Universalists and Christians celebrated Easter, and it is no coincidence that at the same time, Jews, the progenitor religion of many Western faiths, also finished celebrating our own holiday of renewal and hope. The holiday of Passover commemorates our people's rebirth and resurrection, if you will, the story of Israelite freedom from Egyptian bondage that we heard about. The story is simple and enduring. Experiencing pain and suffering, our people had the audacity, we call it chutzpah, to imagine a better place in a promised land. And the Bible tells us that with God's help, they walked towards hope and freedom and possibility, step by step. Each spring, Jews use a book called the Haggadah, as I told about, to retell the story of the Exodus during Passover. We reenact the trials and tribulations, the 10 plagues described in the Bible. We ask questions and sing songs and eat good food. As my uncle always said, you can summarize a Jewish holiday pretty simply by this: they tried to kill us, we won, let's eat. In these weeks surrounding Passover, I often think about the imperative embedded in the Haggadah, the imperative that I shared with you earlier. In Hebrew, it says, B'chol dor v'dor chayav adam lirot et atzmo ki'ilu hu yitzah mitzrayim. In each and every generation, a person is obligated to see oneself as if he or she exited from Egypt. And I shared this verse with you earlier because I see it as being so important. If Egypt represents the pain and suffering and oppression and narrowness, then we are called to retell and recall the biblical story of the Exodus by seeing ourselves and our lives as connected somehow to the ancient story of bondage and freedom. So this morning I share with you a personal story of Egypt and journey towards freedom. When I was 12 years old, my family and I moved to Florida from Colorado. We lived in Florida for 2 years when Hurricane Andrew struck. The hurricane destroyed our home, our neighborhood, and my school. And a few months later, my parents separated. Not long after that, my father took me out for dinner and disclosed that he and my mother were divorcing because he is gay. So it was a tough year filled with losing a home, changing schools, parents divorcing, and a father coming out of the closet. And I moved back to Colorado. Colorado had no hurricanes, literally. It is impossible for there to be a hurricane in Colorado. But it had embracing extended family, members, and really a stable school. And in many ways, Colorado was supposed to be the promised land of security for me at 13 years old. But it wasn't entirely so. That previous fall, Colorado's voters passed Amendment 2 at the ballot. Colorado's Amendment 2 allowed local governments and private businesses to discriminate against gays and lesbians. And I vividly remember that my first family holiday back in Colorado was Passover. And over dinner, our discussion turned from the Israelite redemption from slavery to the question of gay rights. And while my own extended family supported gay rights, it was clear that the majority of Colorado's voters did not. And as you might imagine, given all that was happening in my life, there was no way that I, then a 14-year-old teen, was going to let anyone know that my father was gay. I was terrified. I didn't feel safe or assured that the people in Colorado would accept my truth, my father, or me. Colorado was no promised land. So one day I felt particularly alone, and I decided to walk to my synagogue after school instead of walking home. And I asked to see the rabbi, and he came out to see me, and we talked. And the next week, I made the same trek again. And my rabbi and I, we talked some more, and the next week, I did the same, and we talked some more. And I explained how I was scared and felt alone in the struggles and brokenness and changes and the pains in my own life. And he said to me, "You have a place here. You have a place here." And he introduced me to the youth group advisors and leaders, and I signed myself up for religious school, and the youth advisors invited me to participate, and they encouraged me to be myself, to think what I thought, to question, and to feel safe enough to laugh and to cry. If Egypt was a period of brokenness and narrowness, my congregation in Denver became my promised land of safety and security. During my final year at the Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion, my ordination class had a series of sessions with Dr. David Ellenson, the president of our seminary. And President Ellenson shared with us various teachings of famous rabbis and philosophers and theologians. And one thing that he said really stuck with me. He said, all theology is biography. All theology is biography. President Ellenson flashed a picture of a famous rabbi onto the screen, and he shared their biography and showed how their theology and worldview was impacted by their life story. All theology is biography. The theology of the Israelites came from the biography of the Exodus, to worship a compassionate, loving, and gracious God who gave us life and supported us upon our journey towards freedom. Thus, the Bible commands us to treat the stranger with similar compassion and love, just as we would treat ourselves, because we knew what it was like to be strangers and slaves in Egypt. A modern example of this idea came a few weeks ago when Senator Rob Portman of Ohio, a Republican, announced that his gay son encouraged him to change his opinion about marriage equality. Portman had voted for a federal amendment to ban gay marriage. He had also voted to prohibit gay parents from adopting children. So it came as a surprise to many when he said that his son's coming out of the closet, quote, allowed me to think of the issue from a new perspective. And that's of a dad who loves his son a lot and wants him to have the same opportunities that his brother and his sister would have, to have a relationship like Jane and I have had for these 26 years. The responses to Senator Portman's announcement has been varied. Many have applauded him. And many, on both the left and the right, and interestingly, particularly on the left, viciously attacked him for not being principled and for changing positions and turning like the weather vane with the winds of his personal experience. And to those who criticize, I say this: B'chol dor v'dor chayav adam lirot et atzmo ki'ilu hu yitzah miMitzrayim. In each and every generation, a person is obligated to see oneself as if he or she exited from Egypt. The journey is real. Our lives change. Realities hit us. We experience Egypt and Exodus and Sinai moments. We learn and we grow. For Jews, and I think for all humans, Passover is about that rebirth, the budding possibility and hope that proudly says that what was or what is not prescriptive of the future. Our values and our ethics often change precisely because of the empathy that arrives from our lived personal experience. Our theology emerges from our personal biographies. The rabbi's staff and youth group, well, they supported me when I was in a tough place, my Egypt. And later, my youth group advisors encouraged me to take my anger and channel it towards good. Together, we created social action projects to deliver meals to help AIDS victims, most of whom at that time were gay men living and dying alone in their homes. And we also lobbied our state and national officials to overturn the horrific law. This is a story about a time when I was in Egypt and journeyed towards the promised land of safety and security. And this is a story of why I became a rabbi. And this is a story of how I experienced the possibility of human and divine relationship, how we can affect the lives of others just by being present. This is why my rabbinate has included social justice and political advocacy and community organizing through such organizations as Dallas Area Interfaith, because I believe with every fiber of my soul that we can act powerfully together when we know one another and respond to one another. This is why my rabbinate is focused on building a relational community through meaningful conversations so that we may transform and impact the lives of one another. And this is why I believe that we in this city need to build faith communities and congregations that connect with one another to the practices and the values of our traditions and to a sense of the sacred presence in our lives. And this is why I believe that the mirror that we hold up to ourselves at this season is so important, because our personal journeys shape ever-evolving and lived theology. There is a promised land. As we know, it can take a while to get there. At least 40 years. But let me tell you a little differently. 21 years ago, I had that experience. And 21 years after Colorado passed the nation's most anti-homosexual legislation, it has come to a place of redemption. Colorado's lawmakers passed a civil union bill last week or 2 weeks ago, just in time for Passover. And the governor signed it into law as people yelled, "Equal, equal, equal." What a journey. Just 21 years ago. And we know the journey is not over. We are still waiting to hear how the Supreme Court will rule on the Defense of Marriage Act and California's Proposition 8. The journey is incomplete. So let us remember that the promised land, it isn't close, and it isn't far either. Our first step as people of faith is to see ourselves as a part of a journey that happened thousands of years ago and still continues today. Ken Yehi Ratzon. May this be our will. May this be God's will. Amen.